Thank you, Monsieur Thierry Frémaux, for accepting our invitation. It is an honor to meet you and to speak with you. You have a very impressive career. You are the director of the Institut Lumière, of the Lumière Film Festival, and of the Cannes Film Festival since 2007. How has your childhood shaped your love and passion for films?
Well, bonjour, everyone. I think that any children love cinema. Well, it was my passion, but at a certain age, you are not alone to love cinema. But maybe when you get older, little by little, you go and see more films, more different kind of cinema, maybe more. For example, for French, for French cinema at that time, more subtitled film, which means that you go to a faraway cinema, non-French film, non-foreign films, and which is the mark of that. I don't want to say you become a specialist, but you feel that you are entering in a special world. I just wrote a book about that. I was practicing judo when I was young, and I just made a book about that because it was my first passion. And I think there is a link between those two activities, being a sportsman and being a movie buff. And I think that it's the same situation in what is that world which can be my world. What is that world with a lot of names, a lot of history, a lot of people, a lot of techniques, or a lot of films, a lot of filmographies and so on, which could be my own culture. So with my friend at the time, we used to go to see films in cinemas, and we were a group of people. But little by little, I became much more alone, because the films I wanted to watch at that time, and I mean that it was my first Jean-Luc Godard, or my first Bergman, or my first, what it's called now, which is a name I don't like, the New Hollywood, the American cinema of the 70s. I was more and more alone because it was my kind of taste. And my friends, who are still my friends, but they still like maybe a more popular cinema. They didn't become specialists. And so what I could say, but I see children in this situation, is that cinema, being a movie buff, being a cinephile, is a real intimate role. And if you take, for example, my friend Quentin Tarantino, it's the same. Tarantino started to like cinema, and then suddenly he became another person. He became a filmmaker, of course, but before that, he was a movie buff. He still is. Bertrand Tavernier, the French director, who is maybe one with Quentin, with Martin Scorsese, one of the greatest movie buff in terms of knowledge in the world. It was he told that, and we made a book together. Cinema, first time, makes me feeling that I was somebody.
That's very interesting. So obviously you've just mentioned 3 directors, but you took a very different path. You went towards the festival side of the industry, and I'm just curious to know what led to that change in a way.
I couldn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yes. Basically,
because it's a technical problem.
I'm just wondering what led you to become a festival director rather than a film director like the ones you've mentioned just before.
Well, I think that when you are, because what I mentioned about that cinema culture could have been mentioned as well for music, for literature, or for any kind of passion. So when you are a movie buff, you want to become a director. So I guess because it was a long time ago, I don't guess, I know, I'm sure that I wanted to be a director. But I grew up in Lyon, which is not Paris, and France, as you know, is a very centralized country. All about cinema was in Paris, not in Lyon, despite that the city is the birthplace of cinema, but at that time nobody knew that. And it was not really an event. And maybe because I was not only a judoka, but I was a teacher, I also became a movie buff for who giving the transmission was very important. So I started like that. I started working in a cinematheque in the early 80s. The Lumière Institute was just starting. Bertrand Tavernier was the first president. I was a student, and I had that passion for film. So I proposed myself to be a volunteer, which is very important because still today, when a young guy or a young girl come to me and saying, well, I would like to work with you, say, okay, first as a volunteer without any salary, which is the best proof that you believe in what you do, that it's your passion, that you don't count your days, your hours of work, and so on. So I did like 8 years. I was doing a thesis at the university. So I worked 8 years as a volunteer at the Lumière Institute. It was not a volunteer job, it was a real job, but without any salary. And maybe becoming a filmmaker was a dream, but was an unreachable dream for a young guy in Lyon. And once I could have made that choice, it was too late in a way. I was really inside the world of cinematheque, and so now, if I want to write a movie and maybe to ask some friends who are producers to produce my first film, maybe I could succeed for that. But well, I'm not sure that, and I can't. You know, my job, and especially in Cannes, is to watch 2,000 films every year and to pick up a selection of 60 movies. So I'm in a way, I don't like that word, but I'm judging film. I judge films of filmmakers. So it's impossible for me in saying, you, yes, you know, and then suddenly, what do you think of my film? So I think it's another world. I did a film recently, which was a documentary about the Lumière brothers. So it was a film made by Lumière Films. So and I said, it's not my film. It's not a film directed by me. It's a film directed by the Lumière brothers. But I think it could be something, to me, not acceptable to make a film, or I have to quit everything to make me totally forgotten and then to come back. You know, my favorite story of Cannes is that when François Truffaut, in the 50s, he was a young journalist, and he was so tough, so rude. He was so strong, but also so full of good or bad energy that he was exfiltrated. He was pushed out of the festival in 57, I guess, I remember. And then he came back 2 years later or 3 years later with Les 400 coups, with the 400 blows. And so it's my favorite story because sometimes when a journalist is not nice with me, I used to say, okay, if you don't stop that, we will push you out of this festival, but please come back in 3 years with a wonderful film.
Thank you for that anecdote. It's very funny. As the director of the Cannes Film Festival, what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome? And what do you consider to be your biggest accomplishment?
Well, when Gilles Jacob, who was the head of Cannes at that time, asked me to work with him, called me to go to Paris, I first said no. I refused first because, of course, it was the dream of everyone to be in Cannes. But first, I like my city of Lyon. I like my football team of Lyon. And I like the idea that we had a lot of things to do around what is called the street of the first film, la rue du premier film. We had with Bertrand Tavernier to build that archive, that cinematheque. So I wanted to dedicate myself to that. So I said to Gilles, I can't do that because I want to stay and do what I have to do. And he said, okay, come with me in Cannes and I'll let you part of your time continuing what you are doing in Lyon. So we made that deal. And my first challenge was to arrive after him because Gilles Jacob, like before him, Robert Fabre-Lebray, was a legend of Cannes. He started 20 years or 25 years before, which is also one of the quality of this festival. Because before him, Robert Fabre-Lebray stayed like 30 years in Cannes. And even myself, one day they will tell me, okay, it's enough, go back home. But I think the stability and the strength of the festival comes from that that wisdom, that idea that it's not us, it's the institution, it's the festival itself, which is the most important thing. So my first thing was to, in a way, to learn my job, and Gilles Jacob was a wonderful teacher, and then once after like 7 years, he said, "Okay, you are now the general manager of the festival." Of course, to be the good man at the good place, and nothing is never sure. Of course, to me, things went well, but imagine you do a bad year. Bad year means the press is upset, the films are not good, the selection is not considered as a good selection. So the reputation of Cannes in one moment of the year is not good. Okay, that happens, but you do that 1 year, you do that a second year, you can't do that a third year. And maybe what we used to say in French, si je perds la main, if I have a bad hand in my play, I will be the first who says, okay, I think I can't understand the cinema of my times anymore. So it's very important to know the story of cinema, story of Cannes, the history also of the press, of the relationship between, because Cannes is alive, especially because it's supported by the journalists, by the critics, by the press. Of course, sometimes we have some arguments together because I'm still a movie buff and I still have that passion of films. So when I read something bad about the film I like, I'm upset myself. And it's something maybe I have to change, because to someone in my position, I'm not supposed to have some fight with the journalists. But I like that. I like that because it's the soul of our jobs. We love cinema, and the critics are the people who, like me, watch a lot of movies every year. So we love to talk. But that was the thing we had to do, and maybe it's the best accomplishment. Maybe to succeed after and over Gilles Jacob, and to be still alive today, that is the best accomplishment. We did a lot of things, and it's the idea that Cannes was prestigious before me. It is still prestigious with me. I want to say that in a humble way. And it will be prestigious after me. It has to be prestigious after me. And even now, we are building something. Of course, it's a very special year because Cannes has been cancelled last year. And it will be the year of the comeback. But it's also, we are in 2021 is the first year of the third decade of the century. So we have 10 years in front of us. So we also have to think about the future. And the future is quite interesting. Not only the future of Cannes, but the future of cinema, the future of images, the future of films. Cinema used to face a lot of challenges. I don't want to say enemies, but a lot of challenges. Television in the 50s, video in the 80s, internet 10 years ago, and now the platforms. What makes this year very special is that we can't act ourselves. We can't defend ourselves because as Netflix is a great triumph, we can't say, yeah, but please, let's go and see a film on the big screen because all the cinemas are closed. But despite that, we know that the future will be the question about how can be the relationship between platforms and cinema and theaters. How can be the relationship between noble or an old culture of cinema and that new culture of cinema, which means that when it was so hard to watch some classic films in the past, I have a lot in my smartphone. So that's why I wanted to stay in Lyon also, because working in an archive is also working for history, for the past of an art, and which is very important, and for the future of this art. And when I mention Netflix, I want to say that I know, of course, very well the people of Netflix. They are my friends, and they are great movie buffs. They come from the movie buff world, so they don't want to destroy cinema. But of course, they have to make their company strong, and we have to make cinema strong. So it will be very interesting in the future. I'm sorry I'm long.
I mean, all of that, yeah, that was very interesting. But obviously, one of the main responsibilities of the festival is selecting the films, right? And that's what you guys do year after year, is present the world with 60 films that you have decided are worth seeing. So I'm curious to see what the process to get to that is and what you look for when you're selecting.
Well, I think that first, a selection of Cannes, but any festival, or especially a specialized festival, you need to give a photography, a photo of what cinema is. Not a photo of the year, a photo of that moment. For us, at the late spring, here is what was our journey and what is the best moment of our journey. The journey is the selection process, which starts in November, which becomes quite active and strong in March, February, March, and which is totally crazy in April. We watch 2,000 films. I don't want to say that they are all good, or it's not about matter of taste. It's about my job is not to say I like, I don't like. My job is to say, is this film convenient for Cannes or not? Is this film what the kind of work the festival goers and the press want to see in Cannes or not? I'm not a critic. Of course, I have my own taste, but I'm not a critic. It's different. A critic is going to talk about the film and to talk about the position of the film in what cinema is and so on. We have, the job is to say, here is the film we think you should see, which is not exactly the same. And of course, as a critic, I make some mistakes every year. What I think was very good and was a film I had to show. Sometimes, of course, everyone says, "No, you're crazy. Why did you pick up this film?" And we make some mistakes, but it's good also to be mistaken. And I think that you know, I don't want to say that it's an easy job, because it's a very tough job, especially because you have to watch like 6, 7, 8 films every day, and to spend your time talking by phone in the morning with the Asian people, in the evening and night with the American people. And so it's a very exhausting job. But you also have to keep moment for pure pleasure. And once we cut the light out, when we are in the screening room, you should be again a normal spectator, and you should take the position of several people: the critic, the professional, a producer, another artist, and so on. And then you compose like a menu. You compose a selection of 60 films, which will be the most important or expected film in the year, or in this moment. For example, Cannes is a place which is quite demanding in the critic point of view. It's famous for that. The critics are in Cannes, and they are in Cannes to write about films. So they are quite tough. So you can have a Hollywood studio, they know that. So they don't want to expose a film which is a popular film to critics which are waiting for artistic film. So you have also to make a mix between artistic film, which is globally for what the competition exists, but also some gala screening, opening night, midnight film, or a big red carpet film evening with some films which are more popular film, but also because it's something I believe in. I'm the kind of movie buff. I can like Jean-Luc Godard, Jean-Marie Straub, Ingmar Bergman, but also some very popular and midnight or Saturday night kind of cinema. It's not, I don't pay any effort for that. I'm like that. The idea is that I have to know, and I want to know what I'm watching. If I watch a classic film directed by Bergman or by Rossellini, I know what I watch. If I watch a Star Wars film with my kids, I know what I watch. And in Cannes, it's like a big bookstore. You have history of literature, you have new incoming books. You have also, I don't want to say cooking books, but the kind of, these are all books. We screen a lot of films. And that's why when I arrived, and regarding to the previous question, for what I did when I arrived, because it's my taste, I invited documentaries in the official selection. I invited animation films in the official selection. And because those categories of cinema are cinema. And I think there is not a minor or major kind of cinema. There is a good cinema or bad cinema, but even bad cinema. What do you know when you watch a film, when you show a film, when a critic say it's good or bad in May every year? It will be in July this year. In May every year, what do you know that it will be still the same opinion in 10 years? The best critic is time. In cinema and in painting, in everything. So that is a good reason to stay very cool, humble, and to stay modest with the job.
Thank you. With the way that the landscape of cinema has evolved and changed over the past few years, What do you think is the place of film festivals today, and how should or could they evolve in coming years?
Well, to go back to that subject matter of platforms, of internet, of the position of the screening rooms or theaters in the future, it's mainly the same position of festival. More and more in the future, festival will become more important. Why? Because the civilization we are living in, they wanted to stay home, to order pizzas, to order films, and to be alone or to be with the family or friends. But what we like, what we experience in going to a screening room, to a theater, was to be alone with a group of people you don't know, to be alone during 2 hours without any light, with even out this, and you don't have any button pause to stop the film. That's why I used to say that when Martin Scorsese does The Irishman for Netflix, he does the same. He does the same job than when he makes Taxi Driver. He's a filmmaker. Okay, but the film is not the same if you watch the film on your smartphone and if you watch the film on big screen. And we screened the movie, The Irishman, 3 hours and something, in Lyon at the Lumière Festival on the big screen with Martin Scorsese. He was here, and it's not the same film. So I think that the festivals, being all together to watch, and especially in Cannes, you dress yourself to watch a film. You wear a tuxedo, or for women, I don't know the word. And I mean, it's a ritual, it's a tradition, it's a respect in a way. We do something like that in the same way that what you in London, you do for theaters, that tradition, that English tradition of theater, what they do in Milano for the opera. And I think that more and more, we don't talk about the death of music, the death of theater. Why are we talking sometimes, and more often because of the triumph of the platforms, about the death of cinema? But regarding this matter, I think that a film festival, to go straight to your question, a film festival is a show, is a live show. Film festival is not one film after another. It's a way to be all together with some people coming from another country, with discussion, with dinners. That's why we pushed back in July this year, because we want to make a normal film festival with red carpet films and dinners, which is very important. Why? Because, and especially in this moment today, you don't have any dinner in London, in New York, in Paris, because you can't see people, you can't meet people. And it's a pity, because it's when you meet people, and even some people that you don't know, that you open yourself in some universe. And I think that film festival will become more and more important. They are. You have, of course, in France, in Europe, a lot of film festival. In London, the BI Film London Film Festival is a great moment of the year. You have a lot of film festival now in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Korea, in North Europe, in Sweden, etc. So, and they are all successful. And we have in Lyon, we opened 10 years ago, a new kind of film festival, which was a film festival of classic cinema. And of course, the financial people and the political people of Lyon, they were quite skeptical about that. They were not sure about that idea to show classic films, because film festival means stars, means artists. And I knew that we had two strong ideas. The first one is that The artists, they are movie buff. I was talking about Tarantino and Martin Scorsese, of course, they are movie buff. But a lot of artists, actors, directors, they are movie buff, and this is something which is not known. And we knew that it was possible to invite people to talk not about their work, but about their admiration for people. And admiration is something very important when you work in those worlds. And the second thing is that when I said that we needed to make a classic cinema festival, is that the classic cinema is coming back. I started my career and it was a lost world. We were considered as young and old people in the same way, because we were focused on something which was not, which didn't interest anyone. But now, first, because of restoration, because of the digital world, which makes possible to restore a lot of classic cinema. And if you go just after that meeting on Netflix, I'm sure in England, but in France, for example, on Netflix, we have a lot of classic cinema. They bought a lot of Claude Sautet film, Claude Chabrol film, Jean-Luc Godard. So classic cinema is coming back, like Shakespeare, like Mozart, like what is history of an art, which is something important. When I started, I don't want to say it was not important, but it was not quite well considered. We have in France some legend like the French Cinémathèque, Henri Langlois, like a tradition of cinema magazine. But working in another archive was not the job of future, I can tell you. But now it's good to know that what we did was not for nothing.
I really like that comparison between the sort of return of classic music and the return of classic cinema. That's very interesting. To go back to what you previously said about platforms, there's been, so recently Warner Brothers has made a deal to release their films both online and in cinemas at the same time. Some have said it's kind of a middle ground, and some have said it's the final nail in a coffin. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, first, it was not a real surprise from a studio to think about how to manage that awful year, that awful moment we are living in. Second thing is that Warner said that it's only for 2021. And of course, this situation, it's only for United States. In France, the film, when it will be possible, the film will come out in theaters. The third thing is that I perfectly understand the position, the feeling, the pain of Chris Nolan or Denis Villeneuve, who directed Dune, and Dune is a film made for the big screen, and it will be maybe in the States only for the small screen. Even, and I believe them, if Warner said, no, it will be for both. But now your question is very interesting because it's exactly that, the discussion of the future. And we have in France, and I guess in England too, what we call the chronology of media. Means that first the film must come out in theaters, then on video, then on television, then on platforms. And that was, I don't want to say the whole world, but of course, it based on rules which have been made years ago. And we have to look at that very closely. In France, they are working on that to make that chronology a little bit more different and to make the day of a release of a film in theaters and the day of a release of a film on video or television or platforms a little bit closer. A little bit, yes, I think it's more than a little bit. I think that in the future, and we have, and it's my job, I invited 2 films of Netflix 4 years ago, and it was a big scandal in France. But to me, a film festival is a lab. You should make experimental strategies. And 4 years ago, Netflix was already Netflix, but not that Netflix we have now. And it was my job to invite them and to say, okay, let's put that discussion on the table. And now Netflix is stronger and stronger, and you have Netflix, you have Apple Plus TV, you have Disney Plus, you have HBO Warner, and so on. So this is the new world. So how can we manage that with that target, that goal, which is preserving economically, but also symbolically and culturally, movie theaters? And that is not so easy. So to go back to my friend Quentin, I used to tell him, you are pessimistic because you are American. I'm optimistic because I'm French. And you have in this sentence the two poles, the two point of view of what cinema can be in the future. And of course, Quentin is a wonderful guy. He bought a cinema on Beverly Boulevard in Los Angeles. He has his own theater. He shows movies in 35mm print, never in digital print. So Quentin is a real pure guy, movie buff, and so on. I am, of course, more realistic, because being at the end of Cannes is something which obliges you to be realistic. But I also think that it's a philosophical discussion. And I'm, of course, very sad when I'm in New York that a lot of bookstores disappeared because of the power of Amazon. And in France, you know what we have? We have a unique price of any book in a big bookstore or in a small city library with an old guy who wants to preserve that kind of relationship with client and the owner of the place. The book is the same price, which saved the world of bookstore, publishers, and authors and writers. And so we can do something politically on what is coming from the future and already in the present. And I think that going to cinema, we have also to think about education of that. It's not anymore the first act of a young child. My first film was, of course, in cinemas. It was the only place. Today, the first moment, the first confrontation between a young boy or young girl and a film is the computer or the television. It's not anymore the screening room. So we have to pay attention to that. And we have to, of course, at school, university, but also inside the family world, to make people aware of that. It's very important, like reading, like library, public library. So cinemas more and more will be like public cinemas, which is a way to preserve a tradition, a culture, and to me also the essence of art, of cinema.
Thank you. That's very, very interesting. So to go back to streaming platforms, it can be argued that one of Netflix's success is that they take risk with the films they finance. So for example, we have The Irishman or Mank, films that traditional studios have more trouble financing sometimes. So do you think traditional studios need to rethink their film choices in order to stay relevant?
Well, it's obvious that Netflix has a big and wide road in front of it because a lot of filmmakers the film they want to make, and especially someone like Martin Scorsese or David Fincher, they can't be produced anymore by Hollywood studio. And also, especially in the situation, in the case of Irishman, the film was so expensive that only Netflix had the money to finance a project like that. So we could say, of course it's what I think, but we could say that it's the fault of the Hollywood studio that they let out a big space to the platforms, because they did franchises, sequels, Marvel films, and so on, which is great. I have no problem with popular cinema, but they abandon what cinema. And my favorite game now is sometimes to take film produced by studio, produced by Columbia, by Warner, by Universal, in the 70s, even 80s. There are films which are like not only classic, but they are like artistic form of cinema. They were big mainstream movies produced by big Hollywood studios. And it's crazy because it's now exactly the cinema filmmakers want to, of course, to still to make, and the cinema produced by the platforms. And so the responsibility, we have to discuss the responsibility first with the strategies, not only the Hollywood studio. In France, we have the same situation too, but it was also the same situation in the 60s, after the golden age of the Hollywood system. In the 60s, they started to produce big films, those films which look classics now, but they produce films which were not connected maybe with the essence of cinema. Then birth of the new Hollywood, birth of the young Francis Coppola, wrote the screenplay of Patton, for example. So he was working with the big system, but then, and he did Godfather for Paramount, but he made another film. And I'm sure that, and we know that all started with Taxi Driver or Bonnie and Clyde, or all those films of the late 60s and 70s, and ended up with the financial disaster of Heaven's Gate, directed by Michael Cimino. Financial disaster, because the film is a great masterpiece, but the film was such a big loss for the studio that a lot of people in the studios said, okay, let's take the power again. We don't have to give the freedom to the artist, because we are going to lose money, which is not a wrong wrong observation. But we are in this moment with the power of Disney, which is now Disney, Marvel, Pixar, Fox, etc., and Searchlight, which is a wonderful mini studio, part of Fox. What they have to do in the future, I think, is to think about to keep, and Searchlight is part of that in the big Disney family, to think about preserving the support of artists, of filmmakers, because if not, Netflix will do it. But Netflix, we are talking about Mank, David Fincher, where David Fincher started his career, in cinema. Where Martin Scorsese did that, in cinema. So Pedro Almodovar recently said, no, me, a film for a platform, never. Okay, because we have that in our culture. But once you want to make a film, and if you don't have any economic, financial perspective, you are a filmmaker, you want to make your film. If the money is given by anyone, you take the money and you make your film. So that's why all this discussion is very interesting right now, because it's not only a matter of producers or artists, it's also about distribution, about cinemas, about theaters, but also about festivals. It's also about politics, and it's about culture, and it's about press. I think that in this moment, the press, and especially the American press, they are of course supporting a lot all the production of the platforms of Netflix and so on. But they also have to help us to preserving that culture, that tradition of cinemas. And if Netflix is making their strategy with filmmakers now, recently the Cornel Mondrusco film, which is a Cannes auteur, the Hungarian filmmaker, or if you take, which is coming, the Andrew Dominic Blonde, Andrew Dominic came to Cannes, or Paolo Sorrentino, the guy who did like Grande Bellezza, the Italian filmmaker, they are all working for Netflix. But their reputation came from Cannes, came from cinema. So in 10 years or 15 years, if we have been unable to preserve cinema and to preserve artists of cinema, how Netflix will find out their filmmakers, stars of what cinema is. So the interest is both, is the same, is mutual. That's why I call for a work, what we call cohabitation in France, it's a word in English, cohabitation, no, the coexistence of those two worlds, cinema and platforms. We can't ignore what platforms are and the good job they are doing today.
Yeah, amazing. Obviously, another big topic now in cinema is diversity and representation. And you guys nominated to be the president of the festival next year. But I'm just curious to see what else can festivals and award ceremonies as gatekeepers of the industry do to promote voices like that have been unheard for decades?
Well, I think that, of course, diversity or how do you call it, parity? Parity, for women, yeah. Well, Cannes or cinema, when I was talking about how I grew up in the cinema world, I should have had, so I do it now, that cinema is a way to take the world, not only your national cinema, which is so powerful, but being a movie buff is loving Japanese cinema, is loving Swedish cinema, is loving African cinema, is loving Brazilian or Argentinian cinema. So diversity in Cannes is something which is the big word. And if you have a look on the selections, of course, you have always, because there are big countries of cinema, films coming from United States or France or Italy and so on. But diversity is, but Spike Lee was supposed to be the president of the jury last year in Cannes. And I hope that he will say yes to another invitation this year. And he said that because he was very proud. He was supposed to be, and I hope he will be, the first Afro-American president of Cannes. So imagine, Cannes started in 1946. The first female president was Olivia de Havilland in 1965, 20 years later, which is a lot, which is not normal. We have, of course, to think about what society was at that time and so on. And it was, by the way, something very, very extraordinary, because Sophia Loren in 66. And so 2 women in a row which never happened anymore. I should do that again. But the first woman in 65, the first black man in 2021. And of course, we talked a lot about that with Spike Lee. And the first black man in the jury was in 67, the Senegalese, the African filmmaker, Samben Ousmane. So I know that by heart because it's my culture, my duty, my passion. But I recently asked to a journalist to make, to study that, to make a big study about that. What is diversity in selection, in juries and so on? What is also the position of women? But Cannes has been attacked. It was in 2011, I guess, because 1 year we had in competition, we didn't have any women, any female directors. And I've been asked, of course, about that. And I was innocent and genuine in a way, because they asked me, there is no woman, no female director in the competition. And I said, no, only because we know, we don't pay any difference between if the film has been directed by a young guy, an old guy, a young woman, an old woman, a woman, a man, somebody coming from this country or that country, this style. Our job is to pick up what we think are the best 20 films for competition. And of course, I've been strongly attacked for that. And I think I was right. And I think I was wrong. I think I was right because my job is that, to do that. And I said at the time, please don't ask to Cannes. Cannes is the last part of the channel of the process, which means being a filmmaker and then arriving in Cannes. In between, there is a lot of stages. And so I said, for example, let's have a look to film schools. Do they have in film school a 50-50 women and men share the position of who can become student of the film school? And at the time, it was not the reality of that. And I said another thing. I said, well, in the 50s, when Agnès Varda started to be a female filmmaker, she was alone. And in the history of American cinema, you had Ida Lupino, you had Dorothy Arzner. After Agnès or with Agnès, you had more and more female directors. And today, and I would say in the last 15 years, we welcome more and more and more and more female directors. And in the competition, in the selection of the Golden Globes, last week, they announced the 5 best films for the best award, and there is 3 female directors and 2 men. And of course, it's a big victory, but that was not possible 20 years before. So a film festival, again, is a lab. If we don't have a lot of female directors, it's not our fault. It's because there is a lack of female directors. But I think the future is very strong for that. The future is and even, I've been attacked, or Cannes has been attacked, and it's normal, it's good, it's okay, we are strong. We are not going to cry for that. I think that if people and if activists want to use Cannes, because Cannes is famous, to talk about a very important subject matter, it's okay for me, it's okay with me. I think that, and that's why when Kate Blanchett was president of the jury 2 years ago, they did, 89 women did a big red carpet movement event. And you know why 89 women? Because we had 100 male directors in competition in Cannes in its history, and only 8 89 female directors. So it was a symbol. And I was okay with that, which was a way, another kind of attack but again, you can't judge the situation in the 50s, 60s, even in the beginning of the 21st century with the situation now. And I think that we have to be happy in knowing that the future is totally open now for female director, because it's open in smaller film festival. In Sundance, you have a lot of female directors, because Sundance is the film festival about the young cinema. So all the observation you can do that there will be the conclusion of 5 years later in some of the big mainstream film festivals. And so this is about cinema and women, festivals and women. And your question was about diversity, is also the same thing. But more and more we have in Cannes, more and more people coming from Africa, for example, from West Africa, North Africa, and also for South and East Africa. I mean, the part of Africa which speak English. And what is very good is that in the same movement, in having filmmakers coming from a continent which is not, of course, the same continent of cinema than America or than Europe, but you have both in the same movement, young filmmaker and diversity. All those young filmmakers are men or women. That is also a very good sign for the future.
Thank you. So our last question, to go back a bit to, this idea of movement, as you said, the 89 women on the tapis rouge, the red carpet. We have now, the Me Too movement. We have many movements that denounce the sexual assaults or these sexual harassment in Hollywood. Do you think we should separate the art from the artist? Should we separate men and the artist?
Je n'ai pas entendu la fin de la question.
Sorry. Do you think we should separate the art from the artist? L'homme de l'artiste.
Well, first of all, I think that the Me Too movement is something of obviously very important. But I'm always upset when we speak about the Me Too movement and cinema. Of course, it was born because of Harvey Weinstein life, and it was born in cinema world. In a way, we could be proud of that, if I can say that in an absurd irony. But I think that what the Me Too movement means, the defense, the support of women who has been assaulted, who has been raped, and it's not only in cinema, it's in the world. And I, for a moment, quit my own identity of a movie buff in saying that you have every week in India or in some countries stories which are not acceptable. So it's not cinema, only cinema. Again, cinema is full of media and stars and so on, and for media, it's much more important to write a paper about the stars who was misconducted this or that, than an unknown guy who is working in some office or factory. But we know that the domination of the world by men has still the consequence that women and young people and child abuse that. We can't say that generally, but it's also the truth. So this is the first thing. And the second thing, your question about separating the man or woman and his job. Of course, I think that we all do that. For example, let's take the the fight about Gone with the Wind. You have to separate also Gone with the Wind to today. Gone with the Wind was made in 1939. I saw the film when I was a young guy. Of course, I saw that the film was how do you call that, a sadist, or I don't want to say racist movie, but I know my history, and I knew that the actress was nominated for an Academy Award, and she couldn't take the main entrance of the building because she was black. I knew that story. Everyone knew that story. So I think, again, we go back to what is education. And of course, we have to say to a young audience today, please, you are looking to a film made in 1939. So you have to pay attention to this and that. Education. Now, to take out Gone with the Wind and to destroy the film, like to destroy the novel, by the way, it's adapted by based on a novel. I'm not sure it's the solution. I say that because it was part of the discussion one year ago. And I'm not a big fan of Louis Ferdinand Céline, the French writer. Personally, I mean, I prefer Marcel Proust. Well, but as you know, he's a great novelist. And as you know, he has been committed with the worst part of the 20th century, anti-Semitic, and he was not a light guy. He was, and he was really strong in being an awful guy. So I think that, yes, and it's not me. I mean, in France, you have his books everywhere, and a lot of literary critics, they speak about him like that. So I don't want to compare this or that, but why do we have to make a separation to make separation with Louis Ferdinand Céline and not to do it today? Of course, it's more difficult, of course, but I would add that the most guilty crime of Louis Ferdinand Céline is that he wrote things against the Jewish people during the war. So he put his art he used his art to serve and to support his own awful ideas. That is a crime also. So you can't separate maybe Louis Ferdinand Céline and what he wrote, because he used literature to write that. And then I think that I like very much this discussion. I think that it's very interesting because it's another way to watch history. And sometimes I'm sad that this discussion is more political statement discussion and so on. I think that all the discussion we can have today, what those we had about the position of women in the cinema industry, the position of minorities, for example, the idea that more and more, I don't want to say, but maybe comment on dit un muet? Un muet?
Someone who can't talk, who can't speak?
Personne muette?
Yeah,
Oui.
Someone who can't speak.
Oui. Ou si je prends, that if you are a young, you can't play a young guy if you are not young. You can't play a countryman if you are not a countryman. You can't play transgenre guy if you are not transgenre. On dit transgenre. Bon. I think it's very important, those matters. I think, and I regret that those discussions are so full of nervosity. But I think that those who brought those discussions in a public space, I think they're right. I think it's very important to talk about that. I think everything is about domination. And the story of humanity is like that. And we go back, you know, in the 50s. I was not born, but they had a lot of discussion about Westerns. Westerns are the films which made American cinema, but Westerns were mainly, not in the 50s, against Indians, American Indians. And I think, as a citizen, that the conquest of the West in America is one of the worst things ever happened. They were there, the American Indian. But of course, we were born later, so I'm not sure we are guilty of that. You know, it's not because I'm a white guy that I'm guilty of all what the white guy did, but I must and I should know what the white guys did. And it's part, again, going back to school, going back to the importance of education, of teachers, the importance of giving money to schools, to universities, because it's also, and we are not so far for cinema. We are not so far. Because again, I think that loving cinema and loving history of cinema is also coming from education, from a wonderful teacher who suddenly said, okay, stay here. I would like to show you Citizen Kane. I would like to show you Once Upon a Time in America, in the West. I would like to show you Gertrude, directed by Carl Dreyer. I would like to show you Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa. And then suddenly you are not the same person anymore.
Thank you so much. This was a very, very interesting conversation. That's all we have. Thank you for your time, and see you soon, hopefully. Bye. Good luck. Best of luck with your Cannes Film Festival in this summer. Hopefully it will happen. And thank you, Monsieur Frémaux. Goodbye.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à vous tous.
Au revoir.